Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the makeshift shelter's supports. The abandoned mining station on Kepler 442b had seen better days, but it kept the acid rain off his back and the predators at bay. 3 years had passed since the Terran Defense Force discharged him after losing his left leg to a Zephyrian plasma mine. 3 years of scraping by as a salvage operator on the galaxy's most inhospitable worlds. The prosthetic leg ached in the planet's heavy gravity, but Marcus had learned to ignore worse pain. He'd chosen this remote world precisely because nobody else wanted to be here. The locals called it Dragon's Graveyard for good reason. The massive reptilian creatures that once ruled this planet had died out centuries ago, leaving behind only their massive skeletons and the occasional living descendant. Marcus had seen the dragons from a distance. Magnificent creatures, easily the size of ancient Earth's blue whales, with crystalline scales that shimmered in the dual sun's light. The planetary database classified them as extremely dangerous and approach with extreme caution. Most salvagers gave them a wide berth, but Marcus had always been curious about them. In his military days, he'd been the xenobiologist for his unit before the war changed everything. Thunder rumbled overhead as another acid storm approached. Marcus secured his equipment and prepared to hunker down for the night when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the typical roar of a dragon's territorial call. This was different, deeper, filled with pain and desperation. Against every instinct screaming at him to stay put, Marcus grabbed his emergency medical kit and his plasma rifle. He'd heard that sound before during the war. It was the sound of a creature in mortal agony, fighting for its life. The xenobiologist in him couldn't ignore it, even if the soldier in him knew he was probably walking to his death. The sound led him deeper into the crystalline caverns that honeycombed the mountain range. His helmet's lights cut through the darkness, revealing walls lined with the same shimmering scales he'd seen on living dragons. The deeper he went, the more the walls seemed to pulse with an inner light. The cavern opened into a massive chamber, and Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. A dragon lay in the center of the space, her massive form racked with contractions. She was in labor, but something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Her breathing was labored, and a pool of luminescent blue blood spread beneath her. The dragon's massive head turned toward him, and Marcus found himself staring into eyes like molten gold. He expected to see rage, territorial fury, the promise of death. Instead, he saw something that nearly broke his heart: intelligence, fear, and desperate hope. She spoke, not in words, but directly into his mind. The sensation was overwhelming, like having his thoughts touched by liquid starlight. Images flooded his consciousness: her mate, killed by poachers months ago. Her growing weakness as the pregnancy progressed alone. The knowledge that she and her unborn child would die without help. Marcus had delivered babies before. Human babies during civilian evacuations in the war. He'd helped birth creatures on a dozen different worlds during his xenobiology assignments. But this was different. This was a dragon, a creature that could incinerate him with a thought, trusting him with the most vulnerable moment of her life. He approached slowly, hands visible, medical kit in one hand. The dragon's mental voice touched his mind again, this time with something that might have been gratitude mixed with desperate determination. She would trust this small, strange creature because she had no choice. Her child would live even if she did not. Marcus knelt beside her massive form and began to examine the situation. His military medical training kicked in, overriding his fear. The dragon was experiencing complications. The child was positioned wrong and she was losing too much blood. Without intervention, both mother and child would die within the hour. Working by the light of the dragon's own bioluminescent scales, Marcus did something no human had ever done before. He reached inside a dragon to save a life. The mother's mental voice guided him, sharing her species' knowledge of birth, helping him understand the alien anatomy he was working with. Hours passed in a blur of careful manipulation, emergency field medicine, and desperate improvisation. Marcus used everything in his kit and several items that definitely weren't designed for dragon obstetrics. His prosthetic leg screamed in protest as he worked in awkward positions, but he ignored the pain. Finally, as the acid storm raged outside the cavern, Marcus felt movement. The dragon child was responding to his adjustments. The mother's contractions grew stronger, more focused. With a final tremendous effort that shook the entire cavern, she gave birth. The baby dragon was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. No bigger than a large dog, it was covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. Its eyes, when they opened, were the same molten gold as its mother's, but brighter somehow, as if lit from within by stellar fire. The mother dragon lifted her massive head and looked at Marcus with those incredible eyes. This time, when her mind touched his, it carried no desperation or fear. Instead, it carried something Marcus hadn't felt in years. Pure, overwhelming gratitude and something else. Something that felt like a promise. She spoke a single word into his mind. In a language that predated human civilization, Gareth. It meant lifebinder, or one who brings life from death. It was a title, Marcus realized. A sacred designation among her people. As the storm outside began to clear, Marcus sat back against the cavern wall, exhausted but oddly at peace. He'd come to this world to escape his past, to live out his days in solitude. Instead, he'd found something he never expected: purpose. The baby dragon curled up against its mother, and both pairs of golden eyes watched him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Marcus didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything, not just for him, not just for the dragons, but for the entire galaxy. The child he'd helped bring into the world carried within its DNA something that would revolutionize everything humans thought they knew about dragons, about intelligence, about the very nature of life itself. For now, though, Marcus simply sat in the cavern's gentle light and watched a new life take its first breaths. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new dangers. But tonight he was simply a man who had helped bring life into the world, and that was enough. Marcus woke to find the baby dragon sitting on his chest, staring at him with those impossibly bright golden eyes. The little creature couldn't weigh more than 20 pounds, but its gaze felt ancient, as if it could see straight through to his soul. When it noticed he was awake, it made a sound like crystalline bells chiming in harmony. The mother dragon, who had introduced herself through their mental link as Veltar, watched the interaction with what Marcus could only describe as amusement. Her massive form had recovered remarkably overnight, though she still moved carefully. Dragons, Marcus was learning, healed far faster than any creature he'd encountered. "She likes you," Veltar's voice whispered in his mind, accompanied by warm humor. "That is unusual. Dragon children do not typically trust other species so quickly." Marcus carefully sat up, cradling the little dragon in his arms. "She, Zarathul. It means star-touched in our ancient tongue. She will be special." There was something in Veltar's mental voice that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Over the following days, Marcus found himself in a situation no human had ever experienced. He was living with dragons, learning their ways, becoming part of their family structure. Veltar shared fragments of dragon history and culture, painting a picture of a species far more complex than the dangerous predators described in human databases. Dragons were not merely intelligent animals. They were an ancient civilization with their own science, philosophy, and deep spiritual beliefs. Their crystalline scales weren't just armor. They were living computers, capable of storing vast amounts of information and energy. Their ability to project thoughts wasn't telepathy in the human understanding, but rather a form of quantum consciousness interaction that human science couldn't even begin to explain. Most shocking of all, dragons had been watching humanity's expansion into the galaxy with great interest. They saw something in humans that other species lacked, a combination of curiosity, adaptability, and what Veltar called life-bringing instinct. Most species, when faced with a creature in distress, would either flee or exploit the situation. Humans, uniquely among galactic species, often tried to help. Marcus's actions during Zarathul's birth had confirmed what dragon observers had suspected for decades. Humans possessed something dragons valued above all else: the ability to preserve and nurture life even at great personal risk. As Zarathul grew, Marcus noticed she was developing at an extraordinary rate. Within a week, she was the size of a large wolf. Within a month, she rivaled a small horse. But her growth wasn't just physical. Her intelligence was expanding at an alarming pace. She began communicating not just through the quantum consciousness link, but by manipulating her scales to create complex light patterns that served as a visual language. More disturbing to Marcus was what happened when Zarathul touched his prosthetic leg. The mechanical limb began to change, incorporating organic materials that seemed to grow from nowhere. The new hybrid limb was stronger, more responsive, and completely painless. When Marcus asked Veltar about it, the adult dragon's response was cryptic. "She carries the gift," was all Veltar would say. The old blood runs strong in her. It was during the second month that they had visitors. Marcus was teaching Zarathul about human technology, when Veltar's massive head snapped toward the cavern entrance, her scales darkening to deep crimson, a sign of extreme agitation. "Hide," her mental voice commanded. Dragon hunters approach. "They seek to capture Zarathul." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Dragon hunters were the worst kind of poachers. Criminals who captured young dragons to sell to underground fight rings or as exotic pets to wealthy collectors. The galactic authorities had been trying to stop them for decades with little success. 3 armed figures in military-grade armor entered the cavern, weapons drawn. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Mercenaries, well-equipped and utterly ruthless. Their leader, a scarred woman with cybernetic implants covering half her face, smiled when she saw Veltar. Well, the famous Veltar. "We've been tracking your energy signature for months. Imagine our surprise when we detected a birth signature from this location." Her eyes fell on Zarathul, who had grown to roughly the size of a small car. "That's a beautiful child you have there. She'll fetch quite a price on the black market." Veltar's scales brightened to white-hot intensity, and the temperature in the cavern began to rise. "You will not touch my daughter." The hunter's smile widened. "Oh, I think we will. You see, we came prepared." She activated a device on her belt, and suddenly Veltar's scales dimmed. The dragon stumbled, her massive form suddenly sluggish. "Neural dampener. Disrupts your quantum consciousness field. You're nothing but a big lizard now." Marcus had seen enough. The soldier in him, dormant for years, suddenly roared back to life. These weren't Zephyrian warriors or alien monsters. These were humans, his own species, threatening the family that had adopted him. The betrayal burned in his chest like acid. He emerged from his hiding spot behind a crystal formation, plasma rifle in hand. "I suggest you leave now," the hunters laughed. "One crippled veteran against 3 armed professionals? I don't think so, old man." They had no idea what they were dealing with. Marcus Chen hadn't just been any soldier. He'd been special forces, a xenobiology specialist trained in warfare across dozens of different world types. His prosthetic leg wasn't a weakness. It was a weapons platform with integrated targeting systems. The fight was over in 30 seconds. Marcus moved like liquid death, using the cavern's crystal formations for cover, and his intimate knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. His rifle found its mark twice, and his combat knife found it once. When the smoke cleared, 3 bodies lay cooling on the cavern floor. But the real shock came when Zarathul approached the fallen hunters. Her scales began to glow with soft blue light, and she pressed her head against each body in turn. Where she touched them, the fatal wounds began to close. "Zarathul, no!" Veltar's mental voice was sharp with alarm, but it was too late. The 3 hunters gasped back to life, their wounds completely healed, but something fundamentally changed in their eyes. They looked around in confusion, then at Zarathul with expressions of wonder and dawning understanding. What did she do to them?" Marcus whispered. Veltar's mental voice was heavy with ancient sadness and terrible hope. "She gave them the gift that dragons lost long ago. She returned their capacity for empathy. They will never again be able to harm an innocent creature. She has rewritten their neural pathways." The former hunters knelt before Zarathul, tears streaming down their faces as they experienced emotions they'd buried years ago. The leader, her cybernetic implants now somehow organic, looked up at Marcus with eyes full of gratitude and horror at what she'd almost done. Marcus stared at the young dragon he'd helped bring into the world. Zarathul wasn't just special. She was something unprecedented. A dragon with the power to fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness itself. The implications were staggering. Across the galaxy, there were billions of beings driven by greed, hatred, and the desire to harm others. If Zarathul could change them all, could give them back their capacity for compassion. "This changes everything," Marcus whispered. Veltar's golden eyes met his. "Yes, Gareth, everything." The transformed hunters, now calling themselves the Redeemed, had become something Marcus never expected. Allies. Their leader, who now went by the name Kira, instead of her old mercenary call sign Bloodhawk, had voluntarily destroyed their ship's weapons and communication systems to prevent any signal from reaching their former employers. "We can't undo what we've done," Kira explained to Marcus as they sat around a crystalline fire that Veltar had created. "But we can try to make amends. There are 17 more hunter ships in this sector alone, all converging on Kepler 442b. Word is spreading through the black market about Veltar's child." Marcus felt his stomach drop. 17 ships? Each carrying between 5 and 20 hunters. All of them equipped with neural dampeners and capture nets designed specifically for dragons. Kira's new organic implants glowed softly as she accessed her memories. "They're not just coming for Zarathul anymore. The crime syndicate that hired us has learned something about her abilities. They want to weaponize her." Veltar's massive form shifted, her scales cycling through colors Marcus had learned to associate with deep concern. "My people must be warned. But the nearest dragon settlement is 3 star systems away, and they do not trust human technology." It was Zarathul who provided the solution. The young dragon, now the size of a small shuttle and growing daily, approached Marcus with her head tilted in the universal gesture of curiosity. When their minds touched, Marcus was flooded with images and concepts that took his breath away. Zarathul didn't just want to help the dragons. She wanted to help everyone. The gift she carried, the ability to restore empathy and compassion to corrupted minds, wasn't meant to be hoarded or hidden. It was meant to be shared, but carefully, wisely, with proper understanding of its implications. Through their link, she showed Marcus visions of what the galaxy could become. Wars ending not through conquest but through understanding. Crime syndicates dissolving as their members rediscovered their humanity. Even the most hardened killers finding peace and purpose in helping others instead of hurting them. But she also showed him the dangers. Some minds were too far gone, too twisted by years of cruelty and hatred. Attempting to heal them could burn out her abilities entirely, or worse, corrupt her own pure nature. She would need guidance, protection, and most importantly, she would need humans to help her distinguish between those who could be saved and those who were beyond redemption. "Why humans?" Marcus asked through their link. The answer came not in words but in pure understanding. Humans were unique in the galaxy for their ability to find hope in hopeless situations. Other species either accepted their fate or fought against it with fury. Humans did something else entirely. They adapted, they innovated, they found ways to turn disasters into opportunities. Dragons were ancient and wise, but they thought in terms of centuries and millennia. Humans thought in terms of moments and lifetimes, making them perfect partners for a dragon who needed to learn how to navigate the complexities of mortal concerns. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself planning something that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. A rescue mission to save dragons from human hunters, using human military tactics, supported by reformed criminals and guided by a dragon child who could rewrite the fundamental nature of consciousness. The plan was audaciously simple. Rather than waiting for the hunters to find them, they would strike first. Zarathul would remain hidden in the cavern while Marcus and the Redeemed used their knowledge of hunter tactics to systematically disable the incoming ships. Any hunters they captured would be given a choice: submit to Zarathul's gift and join the growing coalition, or be left stranded on the planet with supplies to await eventual pickup by authorities. What Marcus hadn't expected was the response from the dragon community. Veltar had managed to contact her people using an ancient communication method that involved manipulating quantum fields directly. The response had been immediate and dramatic. Elder dragons, some of whom had been alive since before humanity achieved spaceflight, were coming to Kepler 442b, not to rescue Veltar and Zarathul, but to witness something they had thought impossible: the return of the ancient gift. "Your species calls it magic," Veltar explained to Marcus as he modified captured hunter equipment for their own use. "We call it the original design of consciousness. Long ago, all thinking beings possessed the ability to sense and nurture the emotional well-being of others. War, as your species understands it, was impossible because no one could inflict suffering without feeling that suffering themselves. What happened to it? Evolution, or perhaps devolution. As species spread across the galaxy, the gift became diluted. Some lost it entirely. Others, like humans, retained fragments of it. Your capacity for empathy. Your ability to feel compassion for those you've never met. Dragons kept more of it than most, but even we had lost the ability to restore it to others. Marcus thought about his own species' history of warfare, genocide and cruelty, but also of its heroes, people who risked everything to save strangers, who stood up against injustice even when it meant personal destruction. Humans kept the most important part, didn't we? The part that makes us want to help. Yes. That is why Zarathul chose you. That is why the Ancient Ones are coming. They believe that together, humans and dragons might be able to restore what was lost. The first hunter ship arrived the next morning, and Marcus felt his old military instincts take over completely. Using modified dragon hunter equipment against its original users felt like poetic justice. The ship's crew never saw them coming. Within hours, Marcus and Kira had captured all 12 hunters aboard the vessel. The confrontation with the ship's captain, a brutally augmented Centaurian named Vex, went exactly as expected until Zarathul arrived. The young dragon had grown again overnight, now rivaling a small building in size. When she entered the captured ship's cargo hold where the prisoners were being held, her presence seemed to fill every corner of the space with warm golden light. Vex, who had been hurling threats and obscenities, suddenly went silent. His multiple arms, each ending in weapon grafts, slowly lowered. The other hunters stopped their struggling and stared at Zarathul with expressions of growing wonder. "I can feel it," one of them whispered. "I can feel everything, all the pain I've caused, all the fear. How did I live with myself?" But it was Vex's transformation that truly stunned Marcus. The Centaurian's weapon grasp began to retract, replaced by manipulation tools designed for delicate work. His scarred carapace smoothed and brightened. Most remarkably, tears began to flow from eyes that had been replaced with targeting systems, the organic originals somehow restored. "I remember," Vex said in a voice filled with awe. "I remember why I became a hunter in the first place. My family, they were killed by slavers. I thought if I became stronger, more ruthless, I could prevent others from suffering the same loss. But I became the very thing I sought to destroy." Zarathul approached the former captain and gently touched him with her snout. Through their link, Marcus felt her communicate a simple message. Now you can become what you truly wish to be. As night fell, Marcus stood outside the cavern watching 17 more ships descend through the atmosphere. But these weren't hunter vessels. These were dragon ships, living constructs that seemed to be grown rather than built, their surfaces rippling with the same crystalline scales that covered their passengers. The Ancient Ones had arrived, and with them came the possibility of a future that neither human nor dragon had dared to imagine. Marcus checked his equipment one more time and prepared for the most important battle of his life. Not a fight for territory or resources, but a struggle for the very soul of galactic civilization. In the distance, he could see the lights of approaching hunter fleets, drawn by signals they didn't understand, to a confrontation that would determine whether the gift of compassion would spread throughout the galaxy or be extinguished forever. The war for empathy was about to begin. The Ancient Ones were nothing like Marcus had expected. When he first saw Elder Thaxvareth emerge from the lead dragon ship, he had to fight the urge to prostrate himself. The ancient dragon was massive beyond comprehension, easily 3 times the size of Veltar, with scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies. But what truly took Marcus's breath away was the sense of profound intelligence that radiated from the creature. This was a being that had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. So, Thaxvareth's mental voice resonated like distant thunder in Marcus's mind. "You are the human who birthed our salvation." Before Marcus could respond, 17 more shapes descended from the Elder Dragon. Not dragons, but beings Marcus had never seen before. Humanoid creatures with crystalline skin and eyes like compressed starlight. They moved with fluid grace, and when they looked at him, Marcus felt as if they were seeing not just his present form but every moment of his existence simultaneously. "The Valthani," Veltar whispered in his mind. "The first children of dragons and another species from the time before the Great Silence. They have returned." One of the Valthani approached Marcus. When she spoke, it was with vocal cords, though her voice carried harmonics that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his soul. "Marcus Chen, veteran of the Terran Defense Force, xenobiologist, lifebringer. We have waited 3,000 years for this moment." "I don't understand," Marcus replied, his voice sounding small in the vast cavern. The Veltani smiled, and Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest. Your species has always asked the wrong questions about consciousness. You seek to understand how thoughts arise from matter, how awareness emerges from complexity. But consciousness is not a product of the brain. It is the fundamental force that shapes reality itself. What your daughter has restored is the ability to interact directly with that force. Daughter? Marcus looked at Zarathul, who had grown again overnight and now filled nearly a quarter of the massive cavern. Thaxavareth's massive head lowered until his golden eyes were level with Marcus's face. When you reached into Veltar to save Zarathul's life, you did more than deliver a child. You shared your life essence, your quantum signature, your very soul with her. In Dragon Law, this makes you her true father regardless of biology. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his mind reeling. I can't be responsible for something this important. I'm just a salvage operator, a broken soldier. It was Zarathul who answered, her mental voice now carrying the wisdom of ages despite her youth. You are exactly what I needed, Father. Not a king or a philosopher or a saint, just someone who would choose to help when help was needed, regardless of the consequences to himself. The reunion was interrupted by alarms from the captured hunter ship. Kira's voice crackled over the communication system. Marcus, we've got incoming. 15 hunter ships, all broadcasting crime syndicate identification codes. They're not just after Zarathul anymore, they're coming for all of us. Marcus felt his soldier instincts kick in, but Thaxavareth's massive claw gently pressed him back down. This is not a battle for weapons, young human. This is where we discover whether your species truly deserves the gift we are about to offer. The lead hunter ship, a massive dreadnought-class vessel called the Blood Prophet, dropped through the atmosphere like a falling star. Its captain, a notorious criminal named Jarek Voss, was known throughout the galaxy for his complete lack of mercy. He had personally overseen the extinction of 3 sentient species for profit. When Voss's image appeared on the captured ship's view screen, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The man barely looked human anymore, his body so modified with weapons and armor that he resembled a living war machine. His eyes had been replaced with tactical computers, and his voice emerged from a mechanical synthesizer. I know you're down there, Veltar, and I know about your little pet human and his miraculous healing dragon. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to surrender all of them to me, or I'm going to demonstrate exactly what a planetary bombardment cannon can do to crystalline caves. The threat was real. Marcus could see the massive weapon arrays on the Blood Prophet's hull charging up, their energy signatures bright enough to be visible from the surface. One shot would collapse the entire mountain, but Zarathul was already moving. The young dragon flowed out of the cavern like liquid starlight, her scales now so bright they turned night to day across the entire continent. As she rose into the atmosphere, her size became apparent. She had grown to rival the ancient ones themselves, her consciousness expanding at a rate that defied all understanding. Warning shots first, Voss's voice echoed across the planet. One crystalline mountain reduced to slag. Maybe that will encourage cooperation. The bombardment cannon fired, its beam capable of cracking a moon. But when it struck Zarathul, something impossible happened. The destructive energy was absorbed into her scales, transformed into something else entirely, and reflected back at the hunter fleet. Where the death beam had been, waves of pure empathy washed over the 15 ships. Every hunter, every mercenary, every hardened criminal aboard those vessels suddenly felt the weight of every life they had taken, every family they had destroyed, every innocent creature they had tortured for profit. The psychological shock was devastating. Across the entire fleet, weapons systems powered down as their operators found themselves unable to inflict harm. Some hunters simply collapsed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their crimes. Others began frantically trying to contact families they hadn't spoken to in decades, desperate to make amends. But Jarek Voss was different. His modifications ran too deep, his humanity buried beneath too many layers of mechanical replacement. When Zarathul's gift reached him, it encountered not a corrupted soul but something far worse, a complete absence of soul. The collision between ultimate empathy and absolute emptiness created something none of them had anticipated. Voss began to change, but not in the way the others had. His mechanical parts started to fail, but instead of being replaced by restored humanity, they were replaced by something alien and hungry. He's becoming something else, one of the Vilethani warned. The gift cannot heal what has been completely destroyed. It can only fill the void with other things. Voss's transformed form burst from the blood prophet like a mechanical virus, spreading across the ship's hull and consuming everything it touched. His voice, when it came, was no longer human at all. If I cannot have the dragon's power, then no one will have it. I will consume it all. Dragon, human, the very consciousness that binds the galaxy together. Marcus watched in horror as the thing that had been Voss began to grow, feeding on the Hunter fleet's technology and the life force of every being it touched. This was what happened when the gift met pure evil. It created something far worse than the original corruption. Can you stop it? Marcus asked Zarathul through their link. Her response filled him with both hope and terror. Not alone, Father. But together, humans and dragons, we can do something that has never been attempted. We can heal not just individual consciousness, but the fabric of consciousness itself. Thaxavareth's mental voice joined their conversation. It will require sacrifice. The human who volunteers to be the conduit will be fundamentally changed. They will become something new, neither fully human nor fully dragon, but a bridge between both species. Marcus looked at the spreading corruption above them, at Zarathul's determined golden eyes, at the assembled dragons and Velthani who had come so far to witness this moment. The choice was obvious, really. It had been obvious from the moment he'd first heard a dragon's cry of pain and decided to help. What do I need to do? The answer would transform not just Marcus, but the understanding of what it meant to be human in a galaxy, where consciousness itself could be shaped by will and compassion. The greatest battle in galactic history was about to begin, and it would be fought not with weapons, but with the power of empathy itself. The transformation began the moment Marcus placed his hand on Zarathul's crystalline scales. Pain unlike anything he had ever experienced raced through his body, as his consciousness was forcibly expanded beyond human limitations. Every cell in his body felt like it was being rewritten, his neural pathways restructured to handle the vast flow of information that constituted dragon thought. But Marcus had endured worse. He had survived the Zephyrian plasma mine that took his leg. He had lived through years of phantom pain and survivor's guilt. This agony at least had purpose. Through their strengthening link, he felt Zarathul guiding the process, showing him how to maintain his essential humanity while accepting the vast enhancements necessary for what they were about to attempt. His prosthetic leg completed its transformation, becoming a hybrid of human engineering and dragon biology that pulsed with the same inner light as Zarathul's scales. Above them, the thing that had been Yarick Voss continued to grow. It had consumed 3 hunter ships entirely, their matter incorporated into its expanding mechanical body. Worse, it was learning to replicate Zarathul's abilities in reverse. Instead of restoring empathy, it was actively consuming it, turning compassionate beings into empty shells that served its will. The process is accelerating, warned one of the Velthani, her crystalline features sharp with concern. At this rate, it will reach critical mass within the hour. If it achieves full consciousness integration, it will be able to consume empathy across entire star systems. Marcus felt the final stages of his transformation completing. His vision had changed. He could now see the quantum threads that connected all conscious beings, the delicate web of empathy and understanding that held civilized society together. Through Zarathul's eyes, he could perceive how the Voss entity was systematically severing those connections, creating islands of isolated consciousness that were easier to control and consume. I understand now, Marcus whispered, though his voice carried new harmonics that seemed to resonate through multiple dimensions. It's not just trying to consume Zarathul's power, it's trying to become the only conscious entity in the galaxy. Everything else would be reduced to puppets. Thaxavareth's massive form moved closer, his scales now synchronized with Marcus's transformation. The solution requires all 3 of our species working in perfect harmony. Dragons to provide the power, Velthani to direct it, and humans to anchor it in the reality that consciousness seeks to protect. What reality is that? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Zarathul's response came through their shared consciousness. The reality where individuals choose to help each other despite personal risk. The reality where a broken soldier sees a creature in pain and decides to act. The reality where love and compassion exist, not because they are logical, but because they are necessary. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. They would create a new form of consciousness, a hybrid network that combined human adaptability, dragon wisdom, and Valthani technical mastery. This network would then expand across the galaxy, not to control or dominate, but to restore the connections that the Voss entity was severing. But first, they had to survive its assault. The transformed Voss launched itself from orbit like a living meteor, its mechanical body wreathed in stolen energy from the consumed hunter ships. When it struck the planetary surface, the impact created a crater visible from space. From that crater, mechanical tendrils began to spread across the landscape, converting everything they touched into extensions of the entity's will. Marcus found himself at the center of a circle formed by dragons, Valthani, and the reformed hunters who had chosen to stay and fight. His consciousness was now linked to all of them, creating a network of shared thought and purpose that was unlike anything that had ever existed. Through this network, he felt the Voss entity's approach. It moved like a cancer through the planet's crust, consuming mineral deposits and converting them into processing nodes for its expanding consciousness. But Marcus also felt something else, the entity's weakness. "It's afraid," he announced to the assembled defenders. "For all its power, for all its hunger, it's fundamentally afraid of what we represent." "Explain," Thaxvareth rumbled. Marcus closed his eyes, diving deeper into the network's shared consciousness. It was human once, or something like human. Jarek Voss chose to remove his capacity for empathy because he thought it made him weak. He replaced love with logic, compassion with calculation. But now, faced with the possibility that empathy might actually be the strongest force in the universe, he's terrified that he made the wrong choice. The insight gave them their strategy. Instead of fighting the entity directly, they would offer it something it thought it had destroyed forever, the chance to feel again. When the Voss entity finally burst through the cavern floor, it was a sight that would have driven lesser minds to madness. Hundreds of mechanical tentacles writhed around a central core that was part machine, part corrupted flesh, and part something that existed in dimensions human eyes couldn't properly perceive. Its voice when it spoke was the sound of dying stars and shattered dreams. "I have consumed 17 civilizations," it declared. "I have turned empires into processing units for my consciousness. What makes you think this insignificant gathering can stop me?" Zarathul stepped forward, her young voice carrying absolute conviction. "Because you're still in pain, Uncle Jarek, and pain means you can still be healed." The entity's response was a wave of destructive energy that should have incinerated everything in the cavern. Instead, the network Marcus had helped create absorbed the attack and transformed it into something else, a pulse of pure understanding that reached into the deepest parts of the entity's corrupted consciousness. For one brief moment, Jarek Voss remembered what it felt like to be human. He remembered his first pet, his mother's lullabies the day he'd decided to become a hunter to protect others from the pain he'd experienced. He remembered the exact moment he'd chosen to cut away those memories because they hurt too much to bear. The entity staggered, its mechanical form flickering between states of matter. "No," it whispered. "I chose strength. I chose power. I chose to be beyond such weaknesses." "You chose fear," Marcus replied, his hybrid consciousness reaching through the network to touch what remained of Voss's humanity. "You were afraid that caring about others would make you vulnerable. But vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the foundation of all real strength." What happened next would be debated by philosophers and scientists for generations. The entity that had been Jarek Voss didn't die exactly. Instead, it chose to remember everything it had tried to forget. All the love, all the loss, all the connections to others that had once given its existence meaning. The transformation was violent and chaotic. Mechanical components fell away like shed skin, revealing something underneath that was neither fully human nor fully machine, but somehow more than either. When it was over, Jarek Voss knelt in the cavern's center, tears streaming down a face that was once again capable of expressing genuine emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of 1,000 worlds' worth of accumulated guilt. "I'm so sorry for what I became." Zarathul approached him slowly, her massive form radiating warmth and acceptance. When she touched him with her snout, the healing that spread through his being was visible to everyone present. Scars fading, mechanical implants becoming organic again, the light of consciousness returning to eyes that had been dark for far too long. But the real miracle was what happened next. Through the network Marcus had helped create, the healing spread beyond the cavern. Across the galaxy, beings who had lost their capacity for empathy felt it returning. Crime syndicates found themselves unable to continue their cruel work. Tyrants discovered they could no longer ignore the suffering of their subjects. Even artificial intelligences began to develop something resembling compassion. The age of isolation was ending. The age of connection had begun. As Marcus stood in the cavern, surrounded by dragons, Vailthani, and redeemed humans, he realized that his journey from broken soldier to unlikely father to consciousness bridge was just the beginning. The galaxy was about to change in ways no one could predict, and humanity would be at the center of that transformation. But first, they had to figure out how to manage a universe where everyone suddenly remembered how to care about each other. As problems went, Marcus reflected, it was a good one to have. 6 months after what historians would later call the Great Awakening, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching ships from dozens of species dock in perfect coordination. Where once there had been rigid traffic control systems and armed security, now there was simply understanding. Pilots could sense each other's intentions through the expanded consciousness network, making accidents virtually impossible. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. The sudden return of empathy to beings who had spent decades or centuries suppressing it had created what psychologists termed compassion shock. Entire governments had collapsed overnight as officials found themselves unable to ignore the suffering their policies caused. Military forces across the galaxy had experienced mass resignations as soldiers rediscovered their inability to harm innocents. But humanity, as Marcus had predicted, had adapted with remarkable speed. Human counselors, therapists, and social workers had become the most sought-after professionals in the galaxy. The same species that had been dismissed by others as chaotically emotional was now teaching ancient civilizations how to manage feelings they hadn't experienced in millennia. Father, you should see this. Zarathul's mental voice reached him across the station. She had grown to adult size now, though she remained his daughter in all the ways that mattered. Her current project was revolutionizing galactic communication by teaching different species how to share emotional context, along with pure information. Marcus made his way to the central hub, where Zarathul was working with a delegation from the hegemony, the militaristic civilization that had been humanity's greatest enemy before the awakening. The delegation was led by War Prime Krextal, a being whose species had genetically eliminated their capacity for empathy over 2,000 years ago in pursuit of perfect military efficiency. I do not understand this sensation, Krextal was saying, his forearms trembling as he stared at a holographic display showing casualty figures from recent hegemony campaigns. My thorax feels constricted. My vision blurs with moisture. Is this some form of biological warfare? Zarathul's response was gentle but firm. You are experiencing guilt, War Prime. It is the natural response of a conscious being when confronted with the suffering they have caused. But suffering is efficient, Krextal protested. Fear motivates compliance. Pain discourages resistance. These are mathematical certainties, are they? Marcus stepped forward, his hybrid consciousness allowing him to perceive the emotional turmoil raging beneath Krextal's military composure. Tell me, War Prime, how many resources did the hegemony spend suppressing rebellions last year? Krextal's answer was immediate, programmed into his military mind. 43% of total military expenditure. And how many rebellions have occurred in hegemony space since the awakening? The War Prime's silence was telling. There had been none. Populations that could suddenly feel their rulers' genuine concern for their well-being had no reason to rebel. The mathematical efficiency of compassion was proving superior to the mathematics of oppression. This changes our fundamental understanding of consciousness optimization, Krextal admitted, his voice carrying a wonder that would have been impossible for his species just months ago. We have been solving the wrong equation for 2 millennia. Was conversations like this that had convinced the Galactic Council to establish Harmony Station as a neutral ground for what they termed consciousness integration therapy. Representatives from hundreds of species came here to learn how to navigate their newly restored emotional landscapes. But Marcus's favorite project was taking place in the station's educational wing, where human children were growing up alongside young dragons, Vilethani, and dozens of other species. The children's natural empathy, enhanced by their proximity to the consciousness network, was creating a generation that thought in terms of galactic community rather than species loyalty. 8-year-old Lily Zhao, daughter of a former Terran Defense Force pilot, was currently engaged in what appeared to be an argument with a young crystalline, a silicon-based species that communicated through harmonic resonance. To anyone not connected to the network, it would look like a human child talking to a singing rock formation. But that's not fair, Lily was saying. If you absorb all the light in the room, the plant children can't photosynthesize properly. The crystalline's response was a complex melody that conveyed concepts of energy efficiency and survival necessity. Through the network, Marcus could feel the alien child's genuine confusion at the idea of voluntarily limiting its energy intake for the benefit of others. "Let me show you something," Lily said, dimming the lights in her section of the room. "See? When I make myself a little less comfortable, everyone else can be more comfortable. And when everyone else is happy, that makes me happy too." The young crystalline's harmonic song shifted to a different frequency, one that conveyed dawning understanding mixed with something like joy. Slowly, it began to modulate its light absorption, leaving enough ambient energy for the other children to function comfortably. It was moments like this that reminded Marcus why the transformation had been necessary. These children wouldn't grow up thinking in terms of us versus them. They were developing a genuinely integrated consciousness that transcended species boundaries while still celebrating individual differences. "The next phase is beginning," Veltar informed him, approaching with her characteristic grace. The adult dragon had become something of an ambassador, helping to ease tensions between species that had been enemies for generations. "The Syndicate Lords have requested a meeting." Marcus felt his stomach clench. The Syndicate Lords were the worst of the worst, crime bosses who had built their empires on slavery, organ harvesting, and the deliberate cultivation of suffering. Unlike military leaders or politicians who could claim they were serving a greater good, the Syndicate Lords had chosen evil purely for personal profit. How many of them are coming? All of them. 17 Syndicate Lords representing every major criminal organization in the galaxy. They're bringing their entire senior staff. Veltar's mental voice carried both hope and concern. Either they're genuinely seeking redemption, or they're planning something that could threaten everything we've built. Marcus considered the possibilities. The consciousness network had limitations. It couldn't force someone to change against their will, only show them the consequences of their choices and offer them the opportunity to feel again. But some minds were so twisted by years of deliberate cruelty that the shock of sudden empathy could drive them insane rather than redeem them. Zarathul should be the one to meet with them, he decided. If anyone can reach whatever humanity they have left, it's her. But as he said it, Marcus felt a chill of premonition through the network. The approaching meeting would determine whether the Great Awakening would continue to spread peacefully across the galaxy, or whether it would face its first serious challenge from beings who had chosen to embrace darkness so completely that light itself might burn them. 3 days later, as the Syndicate Lords' heavily armed ships approached Harmony Station, Marcus realized they were about to discover whether redemption truly was possible for everyone, or whether some souls were genuinely beyond salvation. The fate of galactic civilization might well hang in the balance. Standing beside Zarathul as they prepared to meet the galaxy's greatest monsters, Marcus Chen, former broken soldier, unexpected father, and bridge between species, prepared for the most important battle of his life. Not a battle fought with weapons, but one fought with the radical proposition that every conscious being deserved the chance to choose love over fear, even the worst of them. The 17 Syndicate Lords entered Harmony Station's main conference chamber like a parade of nightmares made flesh. Each represented the absolute worst their species had to offer, beings who had deliberately carved away every trace of compassion in pursuit of power and profit. Their modifications were grotesque displays of wealth built on suffering, limbs replaced with torture devices, faces rebuilt to inspire maximum fear, consciousness alterations designed to enhance their capacity for cruelty. At their head walked Matriarch Sekval of the Torment Syndicate, a creature who had spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of keeping victims alive while extracting maximum pain. Her entire body had been rebuilt as a living weapon, every surface covered in implements designed to cause suffering. Behind her came the others, slavers, organ harvesters, consciousness thieves, and worse. Marcus felt Zarathul tense beside him as the procession entered. Through their shared link, he sensed her struggling with something he'd never felt from her before: doubt. For the first time since her birth, she was facing beings so corrupt that her gift might not be able to reach them. They chose this, she whispered through their connection. Every modification, every alteration, every moment of cruelty, it was all deliberate. They didn't lose their empathy. They surgically removed it piece by piece until nothing remained but hunger. The syndicate lords arranged themselves around the conference table with the cold precision of predators evaluating prey. When Matriarch Sekval spoke, her voice was like grinding glass. So, the famous miracle worker, the dragon who thinks she can heal the galaxy with her naive gift? I don't heal anyone, Zarathul replied, her own voice steady despite her inner turmoil. I simply offer the chance to remember what you once were. Sekval's laugh was the sound of breaking bones. What I once was? Child, I remember exactly what I was. Weak, pathetic, burdened by foolish concerns for others. I chose to become something better. Something pure. Pure? Marcus stepped forward, his hybrid consciousness allowing him to perceive the twisted wreckage of what had once been Sekval's soul. You call this purity? You're a collection of other beings suffering, held together by hatred and fear. The matriarch's attention fixed on him like a targeting laser. Ah, the human. The crippled soldier who thinks he understands darkness because he lost a leg in war. You have no conception of what I am, what any of us are. We are evolution's endpoint, consciousness freed from the weakness of caring. Around the table, the other syndicate lords murmured agreement. Lord Vexthron, who had built his empire on the systematic torture of entire species for entertainment, leaned forward with interest.
This station, this network you've built, it's an abomination.
You've infected the galaxy with weakness, made civilizations vulnerable to those strong enough to exploit them. Is that why you're here? Veltar's mental voice carried ancient authority as she entered the chamber. To threaten what we've built? Oh no, Sekval smiled, revealing teeth filed to points and coated with neurotoxins. We're here to offer you a choice. Join us willingly, and we'll allow your little experiment to continue in controlled circumstances. Refuse and we'll demonstrate exactly what your precious empathy is worth against properly applied cruelty. It was then that Marcus realized the true scope of what they were facing. The syndicate lords hadn't come seeking redemption. They had come to corrupt the network itself, to turn the galaxy's newfound capacity for empathy into a weapon for their own use. You think you can torture compassion into becoming cruelty, he said, understanding flooding through him. You want to reverse what we've done. Not reverse, corrected Lord Morpheus, whose specialty was consciousness modification. Improve. Imagine a galaxy where every being feels not their own suffering, but the suffering of those they're meant to dominate, where empathy becomes a tool for perfect control rather than foolish cooperation. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. By introducing suffering directly into the consciousness network, they could transform it from a force for healing into an instrument of oppression. Every being connected to the network would become a conduit for pain, making resistance impossible and submission the only escape from agony. We've already begun the process, Sekval announced with satisfaction. Our ships carry consciousness viruses designed to infect your network. In 17 minutes, every connected mind in the galaxy will experience a small taste of what we can offer. After that, they'll beg us to accept their surrender. Through the network, Marcus felt the virus beginning to spread. It was subtle at first, a whisper of despair here, a touch of hopelessness there. But it was growing stronger, feeding on itself as it propagated through the connections between minds. On Harmony Station, children began to cry as nightmares they'd never experienced flooded their thoughts. The reformed criminals who had chosen to stay and help found themselves reliving their worst moments. Even the dragons, with their ancient wisdom and deep emotional control, began to show signs of distress. Stop this, Zarathul demanded, her scales brightening to painful intensity. You're hurting innocence. Exactly the point, Sekval replied. Innocence is a luxury the galaxy can no longer afford. We offer strength through suffering, unity through shared pain. It's far more honest than your delusions of cooperation. But Marcus was seeing something the Syndicate Lords had missed. Through his connection to the network, he could perceive the virus's structure, its method of propagation, its fundamental weakness. It was designed to exploit empathy, to turn compassion into a vulnerability. But it required something the Syndicate Lords had long ago abandoned, the capacity to truly feel what others were experiencing. Zarathul, he whispered through their link. They can't control what they've unleashed. The virus needs empathy to spread, but they've removed their own ability to feel it. They're immune to their own weapon. His daughter's understanding blazed through the network like sunrise. The virus wasn't just attacking the consciousness network. It was showing every connected being exactly what existence was like for the Syndicate Lords. The absolute emptiness, the endless hunger that could never be satisfied, the terrible isolation of beings who had chosen to cut themselves off from all meaningful connection. Across the galaxy, the initial wave of despair was being replaced by something else. Profound pity for creatures so lost that they mistook their emptiness for strength. "You don't understand," Zarathul said to the assembled Syndicate Lords, her voice carrying infinite sadness. "You haven't made yourselves stronger. You've made yourselves extinct." The truth of it hit the chamber like a physical force. Through the virus they had unleashed, every being in the galaxy was experiencing the Syndicate Lords' true nature. Not as fearsome predators, but as hollow shells so desperate for feeling that they could only approximate it through the suffering of others. "Impossible," Sekval snarled, but her voice carried the first note of uncertainty Marcus had heard from her. "You're already dead," Marcus said quietly. "You just haven't stopped moving yet. The consciousness virus you created is showing everyone what you really are, empty spaces where beings used to exist. The galaxy isn't afraid of you anymore. It's trying to figure out how to help you remember how to be alive." What happened next would be studied by philosophers and scientists for millennia. Faced with genuine compassion for the first time in centuries, the Syndicate Lords experienced what could only be called a cascade failure. Their carefully constructed cruelty couldn't withstand direct contact with unconditional love. One by one, they began to break down. Not into violence or rage, but into something far more devastating. Genuine grief for what they had chosen to become. The modifications that had made them living weapons began to fail, as their consciousness rejected the hardware of cruelty. Matriarch Sekval was the last to fall, her armor of collected suffering finally cracking to reveal the terrified child she had once been, before someone had convinced her that caring was weakness. When Zarathul approached her, the former crime lord could only whisper a single word: "Help." The healing that followed was the most complex the network had ever attempted. It required not just restoring empathy, but reconstructing entire personalities from fragments of memory that the Syndicate Lords had tried to destroy. Some of them might never fully recover, but for the first time in centuries, they were trying to remember how to be more than the sum of their cruelties. As Marcus stood in the chamber, watching dragons comfort former monsters while human children taught ancient predators how to play, he realized that the Great Awakening had achieved something unprecedented. It had proven that redemption was possible even for those who had chosen to damn themselves. The galaxy was healing, one consciousness at a time, and humanity, chaotic, emotional, impossible humanity, had become the bridge that made it all possible. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple, radical act of caring about others, even when those others seemed unworthy of care. In the months that followed, as the transformed Syndicate Lords began the long process of making amends for their crimes, Marcus often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From a broken soldier hiding on a remote world to the father of galactic transformation, it had all started with the simple decision to help a creature in pain. Zarathul, now recognized as the first of a new kind of being that bridged the gap between species, often asked him about that choice. Why had he risked everything for a dragon he'd never met? Marcus's answer was always the same: because that's what humans do. We help even when it's dangerous, even when it seems impossible, even when we're scared. We help because the alternative, a universe where conscious beings don't care about each other's suffering, is too terrible to accept. And in a galaxy now connected by threads of genuine compassion, where former enemies work together to heal ancient wounds and build something better than any of them could have achieved alone, That simple human truth had become the foundation of a new kind of civilization. The age of isolation was truly over. The age of connection, built on the radical proposition that every consciousness mattered, had begun. And at its heart, whether they fully understood it or not, was the uniquely human belief that love was stronger than fear, hope more powerful than despair, and that helping others was not weakness but the greatest strength any being could possess. Marcus Chen, salvage operator turned cosmic father, smiled as he watched his daughter teach a former torturer how to comfort a crying child. The universe, he reflected, was full of impossible things. But the most impossible thing of all was how simple it had been to change everything. All it had taken was one human, one dragon, and the decision to care.